It happened in a place where neither man expected mercy to survive. On a humid Pacific afternoon, deep in the shattered remnants of a battlefield, an American soldier stood guard over a group of Japanese captives. The fighting had ended only hours earlier. Smoke still drifted above the trees. The earth was torn open by craters. The air carried the weight of men who had seen too much. Among the prisoners was a Japanese captain, uniform ripped, hands tied, face streaked with sweat and ash. He had fought fiercely just days before, commanding men who believed surrender was a dishonor no warrior should accept. Yet here he was, alive, exhausted, and silent. The American soldier assigned to watch over the group barely glanced at him at first. He had lost friends in the conflict. He had carried the wounded. He had dug shallow graves. He had seen the brutality of a war where neither side asked for mercy and few expected it. To him, this captain was just another enemy officer whose decisions had shaped the fate of countless men. But then something unexpected happened. The Japanese captain stepped forward, not with arrogance, not with defiance, not with the cold posture of a captured officer. His posture trembled. His breath caught. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a fracture that cut through the tension like a blade made of memory. He bowed. Not slightly. Fully. Deeply. As if folding under the weight of something he could no longer carry alone. And then, in halting English, he apologized. Not for losing. Not for surrendering. But for the suffering his men had caused. Tears ran down his face. Tears the American soldier did not expect. Tears that did not fit the image of the relentless enemy he had been taught to fear. For a moment, the war felt distant. For a moment, two enemies stood in a space where humanity broke through the armor they had worn for far too long. To understand why a Japanese captain bowed in tears before an American soldier, you must first understand the world that shaped the moment. The islands, the heat, the desperation, and the belief systems that collided violently in the Pacific. It was 1944. The war in the Pacific had become a relentless struggle of attrition. Island after island turned into battlegrounds where dense jungles swallowed entire companies, where supply lines faltered, and where survival depended on endurance as much as on firepower. Behind every ridge lay the possibility of an ambush. Behind every rustling leaf lay the fear of a sniper's scope. Both sides fought in conditions that stretched human limits. The Japanese Imperial Army held a code built on honor, sacrifice, and absolute loyalty. Many officers were raised on the belief that surrender was not simply a failure, it was a stain upon one's ancestors. Soldiers were taught that an honorable death outweighed a dishonorable life. This belief shaped much of the Japanese defense across the Pacific. Desperate charges, refusal to retreat, and the willingness to fight until the very last man. The Americans, in contrast, fought with a different mindset. They saw surrender not as shame but as strategy. Living to fight another day was a practical reality. Their strength came from logistics, firepower, and a belief that survival was victory, not failure. Yet their experiences on islands like Saipan, Guadalcanal, and Tarawa had hardened them. They had witnessed suicide charges, night raids, and a ferocity unlike anything they had encountered before. These contrasting worlds were destined to collide. On this particular island, a small but fiercely contested patch of land, an American unit had been fighting for days against a well-entrenched Japanese defensive line. The jungle canopy gave cover to both fear and fury. The heat was unforgiving. Ammunition ran low. Water was rationed drop by drop. Every movement came with risk. Every breath carried tension. The Japanese captain at the heart of this story had once commanded over 100 men. By the final day of fighting, he had fewer than 20 left, many wounded, nearly all starving. Their supplies had been cut off for weeks. Their communications had failed. And still, they held on, because surrender had never been an option in their commander's mind. But one night changed everything. A mortar shell landed near the captain's position, killing several of his remaining soldiers. In the chaos, he carried 2 wounded men on his back through the smoke, only to realize one had already died. The other clung to life, begging for water the captain did not have. He watched the light fade from the soldier's eyes, powerless to help. Something inside him shifted that night, not in defeat, but in understanding. He had spent years teaching others about duty and honor. But now he faced the truth that his men were dying not for strategy, not for victory, but for a belief that had left them alone on an island with no hope. By dawn, he understood that continuing to fight would serve no purpose. It would not protect his homeland. It would not save his men. It would only multiply the suffering. So when the Americans advanced again, the captain made a decision few in his army ever did. He ordered the last survivors to lay down their weapons. To the American unit, the surrender felt surreal. They were accustomed to resistance until the final breath. Capturing a Japanese officer alive, especially a captain, was rare. Suspicion lingered. Was this a trap? A ruse? Or simply exhaustion? The captives were marched to a clearing that served as a temporary holding area. The American soldier assigned to guard them was young, weary, and carrying the emotional scars of island warfare. He bore no sympathy for the men who had caused his unit so much loss. Yet even he noticed the captain's posture, straight yet broken, proud yet hollow. The two men stood in the same humid air, bound not by camaraderie but by the heavy threads of war. Their nations had taught them to fear and despise one another. Their experiences had carved that belief deeper. But neither knew that before the sun set, the battlefield would witness something that defied every expectation of the Pacific War, something no weapon could force and no training could predict. A moment of humanity, a moment that would begin with a trembling breath, deepen into a bow of sorrow, and unfold into an apology that crossed the divide between two enemies. The clearing where the prisoners were held was nothing more than a patch of flattened earth surrounded by broken palms and scorched brush. The air smelled of gunpowder and damp soil. Wounded men groaned softly in nearby medical tents. American soldiers paced slowly, weapons lowered but hands tense. Everyone was tired, everyone was on edge, and yet something about the Japanese captain drew attention. Subtle at first, then undeniable. He sat apart from the other prisoners, not out of arrogance, but because he could not bear the weight of their eyes. To them, he had made the unthinkable decision: surrender. Some stared at him with resentment, others with relief, but all with confusion. Surrender was a word their upbringing had never allowed. Now they were living inside it. The American soldier assigned to watch over the group, lean, dust-covered, and visibly exhausted, kept his distance. He didn't want sympathy stirring inside him. He'd learned to numb emotions just to make it through each day. But despite his effort to remain detached, he found himself looking toward the captain again and again. The captain's uniform was still neat, though torn. His posture remained straight, though fatigue pressed heavily on his shoulders. But there was something else, something the American soldier couldn't ignore. A heaviness in the captain's eyes. A sorrow that felt too deep to be only about losing a battle. Hours passed under the punishing heat. The prisoners received water. A few whispered among themselves. One young Japanese soldier, no more than 19, clung to consciousness, dehydration blurring his vision. The American guard knelt beside him, lifting a canteen to his lips. The boy flinched out of instinct, but then drank, grateful. It was a simple act of humanity in a place that had seen little. The captain watched this moment closely. His jaw tightened. His breath slowed. There was a time, just days earlier, when his men had begged him for water he did not have. He had promised them honor instead. Yet here, an enemy soldier offered something he himself had been unable to give. The internal conflict inside him tightened like a knot. The American soldier noticed the captain's stare and braced himself, unsure whether it carried resentment or accusation. But the captain lowered his gaze, as if ashamed to even be seen witnessing the scene. As the sun dipped, an unexpected sound cut through the clearing. An American radio operator shouting news that fresh Japanese stragglers had been spotted deeper in the jungle. Survivors. Armed. Desperate. Likely unwilling to surrender. The tension in the camp shifted instantly. American soldiers tightened their patrols. Medics quickened their pace. Even the prisoners felt the change. The captain's eyes widened. He knew exactly what kind of men were still hiding in the jungle. Men pushed beyond logic. Men who believed surrender was a stain that must be fought until death. Men who might attack the American camp in a last act of defiance, even knowing it would accomplish nothing. One of the prisoners whispered, "If they come, they will die." Another added, "They will make us all dishonored." The captain's expression darkened. He knew they were right. Meanwhile, the American soldier observed the shift in the captain's demeanor. It was subtle but unmistakable, tension mixed with fear, not for himself, but for the consequences if the stragglers attacked. Hours later, the American soldier was given temporary relief from guard duty. He sat beneath a crooked palm tree, drinking lukewarm water and staring into the thickening darkness. The war had taken too many men on both sides. The jungle had taken even more. And for the first time in months, he wondered what it would be like when all of this ended, if it ever really could. Then he saw something unexpected. The Japanese captain approached. Under supervision, yes, but with determination in his steps. He stopped a few feet away, hands bound, but carrying an energy that made the American soldier straighten up. The captain bowed slightly, not in apology, but in acknowledgement. "I wish to speak," he said quietly. The American soldier hesitated. "About what?" The captain struggled for words. English was not his first language, but emotion gave his voice clarity. "My men," he said. "Those still in the jungle. They will fight. They will die. And you will suffer for it too." The American soldier frowned, unsure whether to interpret this as a warning or a plea. The captain continued, "They do not know surrender. They were taught to resist forever. They believe I am dishonored. They will not come peacefully." The American soldier studied him carefully. "Why tell me this?" he asked. The captain's throat tightened. His answer came slowly, heavily. "Because enough have died." Silence, thick, human, real, sat between them. The American soldier realized then that the captain was not trying to manipulate or deceive. He was trying to stop a tragedy before it began. Word quickly reached the commanding officer, who arrived moments later. He listened to the captain's concerns with wary eyes. Then came the captain's most surprising offer. "Allow me to speak to them." The officer's brow rose sharply. "You go into the jungle unarmed? You expect me to believe they'll listen?" The captain bowed deeply, the weight of lives pressing into every movement. "They will listen," he said. "Not to protect me, not to save themselves, but because they were my responsibility. They trusted me when we believed dying was honor. Let them hear me now, when living may be the only honor left." The American commander exchanged glances with his men. It was risky. It might be a trap. But the captain's tone carried something different from deceit, something like a final act of duty. After a tense deliberation, the officer granted permission for the captain to attempt it, under strong escort, unarmed, and fully guarded. The American soldier who had watched the captain all day volunteered to accompany the patrol. Thus began a walk into darkness, into a jungle where fear lived in the branches, where desperation breathed in the leaves, where death waited in every shadow, and where the lines between enemy and humanity would soon blur in ways no one expected. The jungle swallowed them almost immediately. What little moonlight filtered through the canopy broke into thin fragments across the ground. The air felt thick enough to drink, every breath carried heat, humidity, and the metallic scent of lingering battle. American soldiers moved cautiously, rifles raised, steps deliberate. The Japanese captain walked at the center of the formation, unarmed, hands bound, but with a resolve that made the entire patrol study him more closely than the shadows ahead. The American soldier walked beside him, uncertain why he volunteered. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps something in the captain's earlier words had opened a space he didn't know he still had inside him. Or perhaps, after months of brutality, he needed to believe that humanity could still exist on this island. The deeper they walked, the more the jungle seemed to breathe around them. Leaves trembled with unseen movement. Branches cracked softly in the distance. Every soldier knew that Japanese stragglers could be anywhere, behind a root system, inside a hollowed tree, crouching above in the foliage. Even a handful of desperate men could start a deadly exchange. The captain seemed to sense every danger, yet his expression remained composed. Sweat rolled down his face, but not from fear alone. His mind wasn't in the jungle, it was with the last men under his command. Men he had trained, men he had ordered into hopeless fights, men who still clung to an idea of honor that would kill them before dawn. After nearly an hour, the patrol reached a narrow ravine, fringed by thick roots and ferns. The Americans slowed. The captain halted entirely. "They are here," he said softly. The American soldier beside him tensed, gripping his weapon. "How can you tell?" "They would not leave this place." The captain pointed toward dense brush. "There is water, a hiding place, and they know the land." The American lieutenant in charge signaled his men to form a perimeter. No one fired. No one spoke. Even the jungle seemed to pause. Then a whisper broke the silence. A rustle. A scraping of metal. A strained breath. From behind the brush, a few shadowed figures emerged, armed, gaunt, wild-eyed. Japanese stragglers. Faces hollow from starvation, uniforms torn to rags, hands trembling from exhaustion and fury intertwined. Their rifles were raised, but their stances wavered with instability. The American patrol froze, weapons pointed but not fired. The situation could turn lethal within seconds. The captain stepped forward. The lieutenant grabbed his arm instinctively, but the captain shook his head. "If I do not go," he said quietly, "they will attack. You will kill them, and their deaths will be mine to bear again." The lieutenant hesitated but released him. The captain walked ahead slowly, hands visible, posture humble, but not broken. 10 paces. 5. 3. The stragglers recognized him instantly. "Taicho," one whispered, "Captain." Their faces contorted with conflict, relief, betrayal, disbelief. One soldier lowered his rifle. Another raised his higher, as if punishing the sight of their once proud leader standing beside American troops. The captain spoke in Japanese, voice steady, sorrowful, carrying years of weight. "You have fought long enough." The stragglers shook their heads. "No surrender," one hissed. "We die with honor." The captain closed his eyes briefly. His voice strained as he answered, "I once taught you that. I was wrong." The stragglers flinched as if struck. "I watched you starve. I watched you bleed. I watched you follow orders that should never have been given. Your loyalty was greater than my wisdom." His words hollowed the air. "I cannot undo what I asked of you," he continued, "but I can beg you not to die for a lie we were forced to believe." One straggler stepped forward, hands shaking violently. "You surrendered," he said, not accusing, bewildered. "Why?" The captain's eyes glistened. "Because your lives were worth more than my pride." The jungle seemed to stop breathing. The youngest straggler, the one closest to collapse, lowered his head and whispered, "Captain, what should we do?" The captain bowed deeply. "Not to command, not to demand, to apologize. If you can still walk," he said, "walk with me. Live. That is my last order." A rifle clattered to the ground. Then another. Then another. But one soldier, the fiercest of the stragglers, refused. His eyes burned with defiance, tears mixing with grief. "You taught us that surrender is shame." "I did," the captain replied, voice breaking. "And I was wrong." The stubborn soldier's expression shattered. He screamed, not in rage but in pain, and raised his rifle toward the American patrol. Before the Americans reacted, the captain stepped in front of them. The Japanese soldier halted, shaking violently as his rifle wavered. The captain held his gaze. "I am the one you should blame." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with unbearable responsibility. The stubborn soldier sagged. His knees buckled. He dropped to the ground in sobs. The forest absorbed the sound. Slowly, one by one, the stragglers stepped forward, hands empty, heads bowed. The Americans secured their weapons but did not fire. The jungle, moments earlier ready to explode with violence, now held something else entirely. grief, surrender, humanity reclaiming ground it had lost. The American soldier approached the captain quietly. "You saved them," he murmured. The captain shook his head, tears streaking down his dirt-covered face. "No," he whispered. "I failed them until tonight." He bowed, not in ritual, not in duty, but in the purest apology a man could make. And it was in that moment, as moonlight slipped through the leaves, that the American soldier finally understood. This wasn't the enemy. This was a man who had carried too many ghosts, and had chosen, for the first time, to let them go. They returned to the American camp just before dawn, walking slowly, carefully, as if each step carried the weight of everything they had survived. The jungle behind them, once a cradle of fear, was now strangely quiet, as though even nature understood that something rare had happened within its shadows. The American patrol entered first, weary but intact. Behind them came the Japanese captain, still unarmed, still bound, his face streaked with dried tears and sweat. Following him were the stragglers, no longer phantoms lurking in the forest, but men who had finally surrendered the belief that dying was nobler than living. Word spread quickly through the camp. Japanese soldiers had surrendered willingly. No fairfight, no ambush, no blood spilled. Many Americans found it hard to believe. The Pacific War had conditioned them to expect fierce resistance until the final breath. Yet here were men who had walked out of darkness not in defiance, but in exhaustion, and perhaps hope. The Japanese prisoners were gathered in a makeshift enclosure. The captain remained apart, as he always did, but this time the distance held a different meaning. It was not shame. It was reflection. His face carried the expression of someone who had finally confronted the deepest corners of his conscience. The American soldier who had escorted him approached quietly. He didn't know what compelled him, respect, curiosity, or something more human. The captain looked up, eyes tired but clear. "You saved them," the American said again, softly. The captain shook his head. "I only told them the truth I should have seen sooner." A long silence settled between them, not hostile, not heavy, just honest. Then, unexpectedly, the captain bowed again. "Not as an officer, not as a defeated enemy, but as a man acknowledging another man. I am sorry," he whispered, "for everything this war made us do." The American soldier was unprepared. He had imagined the war ending in explosions, final offensives, triumphant headlines, not in an apology whispered at sunrise by a man he was taught to fear. He didn't bow back. He didn't salute. He simply nodded, once, slowly, because sometimes the smallest gesture carries the greatest weight. When the sun finally rose, the camp felt different. The war was not over. Battles still raged across islands far from this clearing. But here, in this quiet moment on a forgotten piece of land, something had shifted. Civilians would never hear this story. History books would not record the details. No monuments would commemorate these men or their choices. But the soldiers who witnessed it, the Americans and the Japanese, carried the memory long after the guns fell silent. Some wrote about it years later. Others told their families. For many, it became the moment they realized that even in the darkest theaters of war, humanity still found ways to break through. The Japanese captain was later transferred to a POW camp. He lived through the remainder of the war. Some say he became a different man afterwards. Quieter, humbler, devoted to peace. As for the American soldier, he carried the captain's bow with him for the rest of his life, remembering how a few words, spoken with trembling sincerity, could change the way a man understood his enemy. War shapes nations, but its rarest moments shape hearts. On that island, at the edge of a brutal war, two soldiers from opposite worlds found something the battlefield had tried so hard to erase: humanity.